Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening I'm joined by Lawrence McQuillan. He is a senior fellow at the Independent Institute. Lawrence, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Chris.
So, you're a senior fellow, a researcher. What draws people to want to do research and shape policy? I mean, it's a lot of, even politicians often stay away from trying to figure out what policy means, and here you are knee-deep and you've been doing it for decades. What led you here?
Well, I have a PhD in economics from George Mason University, which is a very applied economics program. So they apply economics to actual public policy issues in the news.
Politicians have hated that.
And government. And so that's kind of my background, has always been interested in the intersection of public policy and government and applied economics. So it's kind of natural that I think that I was kind of led to the think tank world and have been in it, for, as you mentioned, for decades.
Right. And tell me, though, was there an initial catalyst, even before you entered the university systems and everything else? Did you know as a child that these things were going to be important, or you just liked how numbers work? What was it? I've
always been very curious. I think curiosity is probably the best skill or asset you could have to be a think tank researcher. And I've also always loved to research and write since I was a kid. So I love the exploration of ideas and finding out what you think about an issue and putting it down on paper and having other people test it and criticize it and refine it. And so I've always enjoyed that process of writing and the creative process of discovery.
Right. And you're a repeat offender. Independent Institute wasn't where you started doing this.
No.
It was...
Yeah, I first started at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University as a research fellow. Worked on a lot of issues dealing with international economics. So I did a book there on the International Monetary Fund. And then I was hired by the Pacific Research Institute, and I was director of business and economic studies there for about 11 years, working on both California issues and national issues. I did a lot of research there on lawsuit abuse reform, tort reform. And then from there, I went to Chicago, and I was chief economist at the Illinois Policy Institute and worked on primarily Illinois-specific economic issues. And then from there, I went to the Independent Institute, where I've been for about 5 years now.
Okay.
And working on, well, one of my key issues is public pensions.
And that's something that's a hot button for a lot of us here in California, but anywhere there are pensions, it should be an issue because there's often a disconnect. But I've got to wonder, are there ever times that you've gone to research policy and research the economic effects of it and found out that the plan was well thought out and it ends up being pretty close to being economically sustainable? Or is it more of a situation where there are people that want to put policy out, don't care what it costs, and society be damned if they can't afford it at the end? Where does it?
Well, I think in the think tank world, if something was working really well, you wouldn't see it as an issue that you'd probably want to tackle. So we tend to gravitate towards crises or fiscal messes, basically.
Right.
So those are the issues that we're naturally drawn to, is where there's a problem or a crisis. And generally, you'll find that the root of that problem is government policy of some type, creating incentives that are perverse and helping to create the problem or make the problem larger.
Are there any particular areas that are more egregious than others where you tend to see lots of potential research opportunities? Are there specific subjects?
Well, in California, it would be fiscal issues. I mean, the budget, regulation, lawsuit abuse. I mean, those are all major problems in California, especially issues, I think, too, that impact low-income people. So, for example, occupational licensure, which is a huge problem around the country in terms of creating barriers for low-income people to pursue their passions and pursue their dreams. I mean, that's a big problem, both in California and around the country.
And that directly affects, if a small business owner can't start their business, that affects job growth, and that affects the ability for them to employ not only themselves, but the communities that they live in and work in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a strong barrier. It might not seem like a whole lot of money to a lot of people, like to get a license for $300, $400, but to a low-income person, that's a lot of money, as well as the tests that you have to pass and the training hours that you have to put in. And it just, if you add it all up, it looks like a huge obstacle, a huge barrier, and it is to a lot of people. So it really is a huge impediment to low-income people moving up the economic ladder.
But honestly, a lot of the policy that I've seen that's designed to help low-income people actually does exactly what you're talking about and is detrimental to them, to their communities, to their families, to their prospects, keeping them in a less advantageous position. Is that been your find as well? Or
yeah, absolutely. I mean, so many government policies that are sold to the public as helping the poor actually create barriers and inhibit the poor from moving up the economic ladder. Minimum wage is a perfect example that excludes so many people from getting a job legally.
Entry-level jobs are not available because it's too expensive.
Getting the skills and training and then using those skills and training to move up. Yeah, it's a huge impediment, especially at the lower rungs of the ladder. Things like occupational licensure or minimum wage to do that.
You just hit a hot button for me. Sorry, I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction. Do you have any stats on the impacts of minimum wage and what it does to lower income earners?
Well, it certainly is, exclusionary policy for minorities, especially youth. Also, teenage unemployment, for example, is a huge issue in places like Chicago. For African American unemployment for African American youth is 40–50% unemployment, and you can draw a straight line from minimum wage to that effect because it just excludes so many people that don't yet have the skills. It doesn't mean they can't acquire the skills or they won't eventually, but when you're young and you don't have the skills, on-the-job training and experience is usually the best way to get it. I mean, we all started that way. I did.
Me too. Pension reform, another big item. It's one you'll be speaking about at the Conservative Forum, now the Liberty Forum, later this evening. What's going on in the pension reform world? Is there enough reform in pensions? What are you seeing in your research, and what drew you there? Well,
in a word, it's a mess. The public policy, the public pension system in California. We're looking at unfunded pension liabilities of upwards of $1 trillion in California, all in, when you count, local, county, state public pension plans. They should have at least, according to the best measurements, which come out of Stanford University typically, they do a good job of tracking these sort of things. So we should have, in other words, $1 trillion more in the bank earning interest today to pay for pensions that have already been earned for work that's already been done that isn't in the bank. So we have at least a $1 trillion hole in the budget that needs to get filled if we're going to make good on the promises that we've made to these people. So that turns out to be about $25,000 per person in California. So each of us has a price tag on our head of about $25,000.
You're talking citizens, not $25,000 per worker being paid.
Per household.
We all owe $25,000 to pay for promises already made.
Right, for work that's already been done. So this doesn't even consider future work, and we're not putting in the money today that we need to cover for future payments. So this is just the debt that we already have for work already done, pensions already earned, money that should be in the bank today earning interest to pay those promises that isn't there. So, it's a huge fiscal crisis in California, and it keeps getting bigger every day because we're not putting in sufficient money. Basically it comes down to we've overpromised and underfunded, and this is the result of it.
And this doesn't even include cost of living increases, everything else. That's just for flatline for today?
Right, yeah. Most pension systems have automatic COLAs, cost of living adjustments. So, again, that just escalates the problem.
Is there even a solution? What have you seen work somewhere where because we see the cities being bankrupted, and states have got to come next.
Yeah, I mean, Detroit, I mean, is a perfect example. I mean,
Vallejo, I think, even.
Yeah, Vallejo, Stockton, San Bernardino all declared bankruptcy,
Right.
largely over public pension promises that were unaffordable. There's other reasons for some of these cities, but that was a large driver for each one of them. I mean, Detroit's probably the poster child of how bad it can get. I mean, they filed for bankruptcy. They had $18 billion of liabilities that they couldn't pay for. Half of them were pension or health care promises to retirees. So with $9 billion of commitments to retirees that couldn't be met. So, I mean, things got so bad. I mean, they turned off the streetlights in Detroit to save money, cut back police, you name it. I mean, they tried to save money any way they could. I mean, ultimately, they resolved it through bankruptcy courts.
Right.
But the retirees actually took a haircut. I mean, they 4.5% reduction in their pension paychecks for current retirees in Detroit. So, I mean, it did get so bad where people who were counting on these paychecks or these checks from the pension plans in the future just to make ends meet were actually being scaled back. I mean, that's how bad it got. And it will be, you know, a reduction of 4.5% going forward now for all retiree checks. So, I mean, that's kind of a glimpse of where California is headed if we don't fix this problem. In terms of what can be done, I mean, we didn't get into this mess overnight, so we're not going to get out of this mess overnight. I mean, you have to be realistic. It takes, you know, small commitments. But the idea that I like the most is to ban or abolish what's called the California rule. We're one of about 12 other states, so there's 13 states that have something similar to what we have in California, which is called here the California rule, which essentially if the day that you start work as a public employee, whatever that pension benefit that you were promised on the first day, you're guaranteed that pension into perpetuity throughout your working career with the public sector and then throughout your retirement. So it can't be adjusted. Even going forward, even for work that you haven't done yet, it can't be changed. So that really is a straitjacket for, you know, local government, state government for making any kind of adjustments to pensions going forward for work that hasn't yet been done.
Right.
And it really locks them into a fiscal straitjacket that it's almost impossible to get out. The ideal situation, I think, is to modify that so that you can renegotiate these pension benefits going forward. I mean, one of the things you could do is go to a 401k style approach rather than the current defined benefit approach, which is essentially a guaranteed pension. So there are adjustments that could be made and are made in other jurisdictions, but not in California. For example, the federal government can change their pensions going forward. The private sector, if they have a defined benefit plan, for example, they can change the pension benefits going forward, but not in California because of this. It dates back to a 1957 California Supreme Court interpretation of the Constitution. So it's not really a rule. You know, it's called a California rule. It's not a rule. It's not a law, but it's an interpretation by the Supreme Court of the Commerce Clause of California's Constitution that it's a vested right that is created between the government employer and the employee on the first day that they start the job, and it can't be changed going forward. And again, I mean, it's a minority of states that hold to this view of pensions, and it creates a whole lot of fiscal nightmares for governments throughout California. So I think the most important thing is to modify the California rule, which could happen as early as, well, sometime this year. The California Supreme Court is reviewing 3 cases, I believe it is, that they combined into one because essentially the question is, can you change pensions for current workers going forward for work yet not done? And so the Supreme Court is expected here in California to rule on it this term.
Help me understand, just for clarification. As an example, if someone started working for public entities at a very high level and then took a job that was lower, they would still be entitled to the pension from the first one? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the pension, when you first start a job with the government in California, it's determined by, it's a formula-driven system. So it's determined by your age at retirement, years of service, and your final compensation.
Okay.
So, so if you took a lower paying job, if that would be the compensation that's used to determine your final salary or your final pension. So it's those three factors that are plugged, but what is set is the formula. So for example, people talk about 2% at 55, for example. So what that means is for every year of service, let's say you work 30 years for the government, you get 2% of your final compensation for every year that you've worked. So if you work 30 years, 2%, you get 60% of your total compensation when you exit. So for example, if you were earning $100,000 when you left, then you'd be entitled to $60,000 pension for the rest of your life. So what can't be changed is that formula. Of course, you know, the elements that are plugged into that formula change over time, but they can't change, they can't reduce that formula unless they give you an equal benefit that offsets it. So the question now before the California Supreme Court is, can you, as a government agency, reduce that formula going forward for current workers? And so that's where we're at now.
So that can actually be sustained versus being something that's completely unsustainable.
Right, yeah. Well, yeah, if you can modify it going forward, I mean, that opens up a lot of possibilities where you can reduce the cost of, you know, the total pension costs going forward and, you know, exit that fiscal straitjacket that you're in if you're a local government employer.
So Lawrence, what other projects are you working on right now? You talked to me about possible authorship and awards banquet type of a venue that you're working on.
Well, what I do is a quarterly California Golden Fleece Award. So every quarter we issue a report that exposes, spotlights an example in California of waste, fraud, and abuse in California government, either at the state or local level. And we offer an award. Nobody has ever showed up to claim it, but they can get an award if they ever want to come over to the office. But essentially what we try to do is expose, you know, egregious examples of waste, fraud, and abuse that the public needs to know about. And hopefully when they know about it, I mean, they can provide the oversight and the correction mechanisms that are needed in order to fix the problems. So for example, we did one recently on the Oroville Dam crisis, which you know, was a huge problem and continues to be a huge problem to repair the dam and to hopefully prevent something like that from happening again. We did one on CAL FIRE, the California Department of Transportation, and the first one we did was on the high-speed rail, the so-called bullet train. So, so we try to hit, you know, major issues in California and show where the public is being hoodwinked or bamboozled or not getting the full truth or information. And so we do this every quarterly, and it's on our website at independent.org. And another project that I'm working on is a book also on California water policy. That's in the works, which, you know, has been a huge issue the last 5-6 years as we went through a severe drought. You know, the estimates are that droughts could be more common in California going forward, or at least more precipitation variability going forward. So I think we need to come up with a much more modern, sane California water system than we have today.
And are there overlaps between those two projects that you're working on? It sounds like there would be lots of overlap.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are. I mean, there's many examples. Well, I mean, the Oroville Dam is a perfect example. I mean, that's part of the state water project, kind of the main water infrastructure of California. And so, yeah, I mean, there's lots of tie-ins by showing, you know, the waste, fraud, and abuse with one dam. You can extrapolate that to the entire water system, and hopefully the book, I think, will point out a lot of examples of, fraud or waste and inefficiency in the water system in general that could be fixed and improve water access for millions of people without a whole lot of new infrastructure being built, because that is a huge problem in California, is getting new dams, reservoirs built because of the environmental resistance to it. So, the more that you can just reallocate water in California more efficiently, more sanely, I think will go a long ways towards fixing the problem right there without a whole lot of new investments.
Are there ways to increase infrastructure and not run the risk of fraud and abuse through those projects? I mean, that's where a lot of it probably manifests, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I'm all for more entrepreneurs getting involved in water and everything else in California. So I would like to see more water entrepreneurs enter California with great new ideas. Water banking is another fix to the system where you inject, in periods of excess rain, excess precipitation, you take that water and inject it underground into natural aquifers. I could see,
versus releasing it into the ocean?
Exactly, yeah, and just seeing it flow out to, the Pacific Ocean. So, I mean, I could see a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs to enter California and with bright new ideas that would help fix the water crisis that we have here without a whole lot of new infrastructure. Doesn't mean we don't need new dams and reservoirs, but I think we could do a whole lot with just smart entrepreneurship and welcoming entrepreneurs rather than pushing them away.
Okay. Now, if people want to track more about your thoughts, the Independent Institute and others, is there a website that you'd like to guide them toward?
Yes.
Or a couple of them?
Independent.org is our main website. And then there's also a web page for the California Golden Fleece Award. So you just click on About Us and you'll find a tab there for the Fleece Awards. But yeah, that's where you can track all of our work on pensions and education, technology. We kind of cover the gambit of issues.
Well, thank you for sharing that. If you'll hold on for just a moment, we'll be back after word from our underwriters, the Liberty Forum.
Some people think that a meeting of conservatives in Silicon Valley could fit in a small room. In fact, when the Conservative Forum was founded in 2003, we did meet in a small room, a coffee shop in San Jose. It doesn't get more grassroots than this. It may surprise you that there are thousands of people right here in Silicon Valley who share your principles of liberty, free markets, and limited government. Since our humble beginnings in that coffee shop, we've outgrown 3 meeting halls. From San Jose to Gilroy to Mill Valley, we bring hundreds of people together each month from all over the Bay Area to promote the principles of American liberty. How do we do it? It starts with a stellar lineup of speakers. Speakers like Steve Forbes, Senator Jim DeMint, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, Andrew Breitbart, Pamela Geller, and many others. These speakers passionately articulate our shared principles and remind us why conservatism isn't just the smart choice, it's also the moral choice. Our monthly meetings are only one dimension of the forum. We underwrite The Right Side, a monthly television show on cable access channel KMVT. We also host a monthly Constitution discussion group and provide tables at our meetings for more than a dozen local groups who share our love of liberty to promote their specific cause. The Conservative Forum is the premier place in Silicon Valley for conservatives to gather, become invigorated, motivated, and empowered. We welcome guests to our monthly meetings and offer special discounted pricing to first-time visitors. Take a look at our speaker lineup in the coming months and join us to learn why we say liberty is made in America.
And that was a word from our underwriters, the Liberty Forum, formerly known as the Conservative Forum. We appreciate them tremendously. They've been underwriting the show for now our 7th season, but what they're best known for is their speaker series, and that was the reason we were able to get Lawrence to come to the show this evening. That happens at 7 o'clock, the second Tuesday of each month at 432 Stearland Road here in Mountain View, about 3 minutes from the studio. And Lawrence will be speaking tonight, but in June, preeminent guerrilla journalist James O'Keefe will be there, and he's always a sellout, so you'll want to make sure to check out that part of the site early. In July, Mona Charen, syndicated columnist, political analyst, best-selling author, and former White House speechwriter will be at the forum. And in August, Brad Dacus, president of the Pacific Justice Institute. In September, Larry Elder, syndicated radio commentator, will be on stage. For more information, you can still go to theconservativeforum.com to find out about the start, etc. In closing this evening, I think it's really important, especially with election season coming and our heightened awareness of the policies and the promises that candidates are going to be making to accomplish, and if they're elected, that you start to think about what are the ramifications economically and otherwise. Do they really help the people that they're working on helping? And Lawrence's work and works of other think tanks like his can help give you that insight and help make an informed decision on the folks that you're voting for or the policies that you support. We appreciate you joining us this evening. This has been The Right Side. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and I'll look forward to seeing you in person or on the show sometime soon. But if you just can't wait, reach out to us at therightsidetv@gmail.com, and we'll take those flaming darts, questions, and other thoughts and get back to you as soon as we can. Thanks again, and have a great night.